Tēnā koe, Bruce, and tēnā koe, Mirren. Tēnā koutou katoa. Good to see you all here today. So, like most of you, I'm a GP, 35 years of that, and I'm an addiction specialist for the last 10 or 15 years. And 2 years ago, I wrote my first Sativex prescription, and yesterday I wrote my CBD prescription for patient number 540. So there's a lot of interest out there, and hopefully by the end of today's session you'll feel better informed. You'll feel that perhaps there are one or two patients that might benefit from CBD, and you'll be able to go away knowing the first step to take and so on as to how to prescribe. So if that information doesn't come through, please approach me at lunchtime or during the breaks. I'm also hoping to have time to talk about the regulations, as we've just heard, and to bring that information back into the relevance of general practice. So let's start with this email that I received yesterday. Hi there, we're doing fantastically. Kira is on 0.5 ml morning and night, having less than 12 seizures a week. It's been so great. Child Development Services and her physiotherapist are amazed at how much of an impact it has had on her, and she's able to do a lot more, like swimming, make eye contact, starting to eat food as well as reach out for objects. Every day has been made a whole lot easier. We are truly thankful that we were given the opportunity to have Tilray and see her thrive so much. Thank you once again. On your right is a picture of Kira sucking on a chocolate ice cream. When I met her through a video consult, she's in Invercargill 6 weeks ago. She was fed solely by nasogastric feeding. And look, for me, this has just been a huge change in my practice. Every week I'm getting this sort of outcomes for stuck patients where conventional medicine has run out of options, or the only available options have increasingly severe adverse effects.
Could you clarify, is that the Tilray CBD drops or the combination?
This is plain CBD. And yes, I'll fill in some of those gaps as we progress. So yes, she's a 3-year-old with a rare genetic disorder, and seizures were 30 a day and reduced to 12 a week. What a huge improvement in quality of life for Kira and her family. In this room, almost everyone knows that cannabis is either essentially harmless or necessarily toxic, and the truth is somewhere between these. This is from a journal I read, Drug and Alcohol Review. So some of you may find this presentation challenging. Is cannabis safe? Is it legal? Is it snake oil? Why haven't we heard about the endocannabinoid system? Should GPs be recommending herbal remedies? And if so, how do we do this? But as we've heard from Andrea, and as we know from our patients who are asking us, medicinal cannabis is here, illicit cannabis is here, people are using this, and many of them are reporting benefits. Patients often ask, how did I get into this? Well, I'm interested in drugs because I'm an addiction specialist, so I ask people what they're using and encourage you to do as well. And for decades, people have been telling me, yep, I use cannabis because it's the only thing that helps with sleep, with anxiety, and with pain. And I think as GPs, we respond to such experiential evidence. And if patients are telling us that, and if the preparations appear to be safe, then I think we're really benefiting the patients by finding out more and supporting them. So really that's my theme. How can we help more of our patients, particularly those who are stuck where nothing else is helping? Next week I'll be in Australia at a 4-day workshop run by United in Compassion. The one I went to in Melbourne 2 years ago, Professor David Caldecott, an emergency department doctor in Canberra, got really worried about deaths and overdoses from synthetic cannabis, started looking into it and thought, why hasn't anyone told me about the benefits of medicinal cannabis? And he's an Irishman living in Australia, larger than life, and his brain is full of all the trials and wisdom. He doesn't prescribe, but he's a fountain of knowledge on medicinal cannabis. Really gave me the courage to step out of my general practice. I still do some and addiction work and do the medicinal cannabis work. He and expert doctors and scientists from the USA and Israel and Australia spoke. So I'm looking forward to the meeting next week in Tweed Heads, Australia. I went to a 2-day weekend in May last year for GPs. Let's just start with some basics. So the term recreational perhaps is more appropriately known as adult use. We're not advocating recreational use for children. So this is cannabis that tends to be abundant in THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. If you want the euphoric effects, I tried to find similes, synonyms for getting stoned and getting high. One I like is the sense of existential well-being that some of your patients might report. So if that's what you want plenty of THC. You probably want a bit of CBD, cannabidiol, to just modulate, and so it doesn't get out of control and lead to paranoia and crazy thoughts. So perhaps a bit of both. So recreational or adult use tends to be abundant in THC. Therapeutic, this is these terms are from a California doctor I'll quote later on. Therapeutic is what people are procuring or growing themselves. This is cannabis that they've discovered does help for their pain or their cancer symptoms or their anxiety, etc. So we're calling that, or I'm calling that, therapeutic. Medicinal, that's what we're here for today. This is standardized preparations, free from contaminants, and it's the same over and over. We can write our prescription for, sorry cameraman, I'm out of shot, for Tilray CBD and know that at the pharmacy patients are getting the same product over and over, just like we do with our other prescription items. So let's call that medicinal. How do you get these things? Well, cannabis plants are a bit like grapes or tomatoes. With tomatoes, you've got the big juicy red ones and the sweet little golden ones and the dark ones and the all the other varieties. They're all tomatoes, but they all have their own different cultivars with their own different properties. Cannabis is like that, and for adult use you'll be looking for cultivars abundant in THC, and for medicinal use you'll be looking for cultivars abundant in CBD or somewhere in between. And so there's a whole spectrum between these, and then the middle term called balanced, where you've got equal parts THC and CBD, as in the Sativex spray or the Tilray 1010. And all of these have potential therapeutic uses. So hopefully that just gives you a little bit of a background as to what we're talking about. But really most of today is CBD, cannabidiol, and we've heard from MedSafe that this is what all doctors in New Zealand may prescribe for any condition that they and the patient believe is reasonable. This is an example from the Netherlands, and so this cultivar is 22% THC, Bedrocan. This one here is balanced with 6% THC and 8 CBD, and Bedro Light down here is a CBD only. All cannabis plants, and they're all grown to have different amounts of the main cannabinoids, THC and CBD. Of course, you can actually extract those and make your own blends. That's commonly done as well. So a little bit more about this. Police seizures in New South Wales, it's a few years back, but I'm sure it's the same now. Total THC about 25% or an average of 15%, and CBD way down here, less than nothing. So this has been grown, as I say, to boost the THC. So cultivars, hydroponics, genetic selection, and in the recreational market, you want highly concentrated products that are easier to transport, that make great profits. But medicinally, we're really wanting something a bit more opposite to that, with a lot more CBD and a lot less of that. And later on, we might even get to talk the difference between THC and THCA, CBD, and the acid form CBDA. Phytocannabinoids, plant cannabis constituents. Over 100 cannabinoids, so I've mentioned THC to experience existential well-being, to get stoned. CBD, very therapeutic for many conditions. And we've got all of these others, over 140 have been identified. Each has its own different properties, and I'll mention the terpenes shortly. Herbalists and scientists will talk about the entourage effect. And this is where it gets complicated, because many of the benefits from medicinal cannabis are thought to be from a mix with the THC, a certain amount, CBD, some of the other cannabinoids, and the essential oils, the aromatics or terpenes. And it's this combination that tends to work together rather than single molecule medicine, which is pretty much all we've got to prescribe here at the moment. I'm getting great results with this. I look forward to a day when a much wider range of products is available to prescribe. So a little bit more detail here. So terpenes are the essential oils, and we've got all these other ingredients analysed in cannabis plants, over 500 known constituents in there. And the terpenes, I think, the essential oils are interesting. So every plant has its particular aroma, and you'll know lavender because of the linalool in lavender that gives it its particular scent. Or hops, it's humulene. Hops and cannabis millions of years ago were the same plant and they diverged. You'll be familiar with words like citronellol or pinene or limonene. And so these are characteristic of all the plants. When we look at wines and the different aromas, your Sauvignon Blanc with its passion fruit and herbaceous and grassy notes, this is because these are all terpenes. They're the essential oils, a basic chemical structure that all plants make. And if your Sauvignon tastes like passion fruit, it's because it makes the same chemicals as the passion fruit does. And cannabis plant contains its own individual mix of all of these, and it's thought that these are allosteric modulators. They change the receptors in our bodies so that they respond different to some of the other cannabinoids. And this is where the herbalists will talk about the entourage effect. The whole pack works greater than single molecule medicine. This one here shows that really they've identified down to sort of fingerprint level all the different cannabinoids and terpenes in lots of different plants, and a lot of information is known. Another basic point, and people are not always aware, cannabis medicinally is not usually smoked as a joint. It's taken as drops in this case, or sprays with Sativex, lozenges, capsules, can be inhaled as vaping devices and liquids, pen-sized devices, or applied as topical balms, and all of these things can be beneficial. Patients tell me, I don't want to get high. And that's a real fundamental thing if you're talking to people about this. And 2/3 of my patients would be in the older age groups. And one of the first things they say is, look, I want medicinal cannabis, I've heard about it, but I don't want to get high. I've got cancer, I've got a limited time with my family, I don't want to be stoned. I've got a job to do, I've got cars to drive. And I think this is where we can reassure them that they may well get relief from their symptoms but will not be impaired by CBD. So it's the good news about CBD is it's a great place to start, and they can continue their normal life journey without impairment. So it's kind of good news and bad news. All of us as medical practitioners may prescribe CBD. It's not restricted, and patients will often be concerned, I'm not dying of cancer, does that mean I'm still eligible? Well, actually with CBD, it's any condition that you as the health practitioner and the patient agrees. Chronic pain, emotional distress are good places to start. There are lots of barriers. One of them is that Tilray CBD is not in MIMS or NZF, and so perhaps you've got your way. I've got something called The Prescription that I've set up where I can just under SIG write anything I like, but actually I've set up Tilray, and if you find that you're doing this, you'll need to set that up in your pharmacopoeia so that it's easy to prescribe. Does that make sense to people? Do you ever want to prescribe things, or patients ask you, how do I get DHEA on prescription, and you haven't got it? Have you set things up like that? Well, you may need to, or take advice. Wait for an hour on the help desk at MedTech and ask how to do it. Yeah. Okay, so look, anything with more than 2% THC is outside the definition of CBD, as Andrea's just explained, and it's way complicated, it's unnecessarily so, and I look forward to something more clear and smooth to make prescribing easier there. So at the moment it's unnecessarily complicated. Evidence. Well, we're going to hear from Giresh and Giles, more evidence. I listen to my patients. I've been to a lot of workshops. I've heard the evidence, but every day patients are telling me, hey, this works. I've been to California. I tried these gummies, and it's the only thing that seemed to stop my migraines. Ask patients their experience, and it's really encouraging if patients report previous benefit. Your prescription is much more likely to succeed. But I see lots of naive people, older people really anxious about cannabis. Will I have to smoke it? Will I get stoned? Well, no, you can reassure them that these are oral drops and they won't get impaired or intoxicated. Other concerns? Well, just briefly, THC is not recommended in children, and at the end of today I wouldn't expect you to be prescribing for this age group. It's something that I'm cautiously moving into with severe conditions, autism with challenging behaviour, for instance, seizures not responding to CBD. But I think today, if you can go away and write a CBD prescription, if you feel comfortable, I'm not forcing you to do so, it's optional, but if your patient wants it and you feel that you can do that, or perhaps know how to apply for Sativex, then I think that would be a great thing to leave this meeting. So I think illicit cannabis with those huge levels of THC inappropriately used in younger people with a predisposition to schizophrenia, there may be a risk. Others argue that if you've got schizophrenia and your mind is going around in circles, the CBD in cannabis might be something that actually gives you respite from the madness that can be schizophrenia. And so for some people, they may be using it medicinally and being unfairly blamed as having it cause the condition. I think if we can prescribe something rather than using illicit with unknown constituents, that would be a much better option. Addiction, well, we know a little bit about addiction with illicit cannabis, but because of prohibition, because it's illegal, the figures are not great. This is something that people don't necessarily talk about, and figures are quoted like 10% might get dependent on illicit cannabis, but we don't know for sure when things are illegal and in the closet. And when it comes to medicinal, I think we can close to 100% say CBD is no more habit-forming than blood pressure pills, for instance, or perhaps your SSRIs. I don't think there's any euphoria potential, and so the risk of abuse and dependence is close to zero with CBD. And at the low levels of THC that you might be involved in, GW Pharma have done a lot of research on people who like drugs. They gave them the Sativex spray, and the users said, no, we'd rather go down the road and buy something that works than use your spray. So I think the abuse potential is very low, and that's how they have to test these things out. Children, well, yeah, you may be approached about seizures, and Kira's the 3-year-old that I quoted at the beginning. Once you've seen some results like that, you'll start to think, this is one of the safest drugs that I've prescribed in my practice, and to give people a chance, it seems to be a safe option. So THC, perhaps more severe conditions. Moving right along. So there are a lot of health surveys that we could quote. Cannabis use is fairly normal in this country. 11% of adults reported using cannabis in the last 12 months. I think that figure's even maybe 15%. And for medical purposes, basically, if we took a 10% of adults using cannabis in the last year, half of those claim that they've used it medically. So for pain and other medical conditions. So look, it commonly is used out there. The Drug Foundation, not far from where we're seated, found that in their surveys quite high uses of illicit cannabis and quite high levels of approval for possession, particularly for terminal pain relief. 90% of New Zealanders in this survey, 90% for pain relief. So your patients will be approaching you and asking you how it works. And how does it work? Well, it's all about the endocannabinoid system. And some of the talks that I've been to at this point, the speaker would say, now put your hand up, anyone who's got cannabinoids in their system today. And look, at the end of the talk, we should all be putting our hands up, because all animals, including us, have an endocannabinoid system, which is a neuroimmunohomeostasis signaling system that we were never taught about. It was discovered when in Israel, Professor Raphael Meshulam, who's still working in his lab in his 80s, identified THC in 1964. And it was some years before they figured out how it worked in animal studies. And they found all these receptors, and they thought, God didn't put them there for the mouse to get stoned. There must be some other reason. And down the track, they found endogenous neurotransmitters, our own endocannabinoids, and I'll explain that. So they're present throughout the body in most cell membranes, more numerous than any other receptor system in the body. This is a slide from an Australian group. It's involved in homeostasis. Cannabinoid 1 receptors are largely involved in the nervous system. So you can see the parts of the nervous system: memory, mood, executive function, cognition, etc. Widely dispersed in the gut and in the skin, which is why it may help with chronic eczema and other skin conditions. CB2 is the cannabinoid 2 receptors are involved in the immune system, including blood cells, and regulate inflammation and neuropathic pain. But that's the simple version. CB3s and perhaps 30 other receptors are known as well. So yes, how many of us have got cannabinoids in our system? Well, we all have, and that is the endogenous, and perhaps one or two in the room have got illicit cannabis in their system as well, but no hand raising needed for that. 15% of us. So let's, I've said that the endocannabinoid system has got a lot of regulatory functions there, and I just want to point out how it works. for me, this is exciting. So when nerve A talks to B and to C and so on, actually neuron A talks to 10,000 others, and uniquely our own endocannabinoids make a retrograde inhibition. And it's the only thing that we do that sends a reverse signal back. So we get the signal that comes across, and then we make our own anandamide and 2-AG that goes back and says, hey, well, I've got enough message, stop sending the signal. And if you think pain, epilepsy, anxiety, PTSD, signals out of control, the concept of endocannabinoid deficiency comes in, where we're not making enough of those retrograde inhibitors, and that's where plant cannabis in the form of medicine or smoking or using weed can actually boost our own system that is allowing signals out of control. And just one or two more on that. Look, if you want to know the details, you know, the signal goes through, you've got the depolarization, you've got calcium going across, and it's thought that 2-AG, which is one of our endogenous ones, it flows back here and back to the presynaptic CB1 receptor and closes the calcium channels and stops the vesicle release. So the science is there, and we really do understand how it works. As I say, there's the concept of endocannabinoid deficiency, and Ethan Russo is one of the heroes of research. I'm looking forward to meeting him in Australia next week. He's a neurologist in the USA, and he talks about migraine, fibro, irritable bowel, etc., with the concept of endocannabinoid deficiency. This is probably a good place to stop. Jeffrey Hergenrather, like a lot of us, he's a GP, he's in California. In the USA, doctors don't prescribe cannabis because it's illegal at a federal level. They can only recommend it. He looks in envy at us. We can all prescribe it. And for 20 years, he's been recommending medicinal cannabis, and he started the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. And look, I think I'll just leave the next slide for you while we break for morning tea. 2 years ago, when I saw this slide, I thought, no, this is rubbish. I don't believe this guy. And then I went to the rest of the 4-day meeting and I heard the evidence behind all of this. Dr. Hergenrather in California treats these conditions with medicinal cannabis and reports great results.